Picture yourself strolling through the heart of an ancient city, not as a tourist admiring ruins, but as someone living there centuries ago. Look up at the towering walls that seem to protect you, but also confine you. Notice how the streets curve and bend in ways that feel almost intentional, guiding your steps without you even realizing it. This isn't just architecture, it's psychology in stone and mortar. For thousands of years, rulers and planners have used urban design not merely to house people, but to control them. From the sun-baked grids of Mohenjo-Daro to the imperial grandeur of Rome, cities were crafted as instruments of power, silently directing behavior, reinforcing social order, and reminding every citizen exactly where they stood in the hierarchy. We often think of urban planning as a practical endeavor, a way to manage traffic, sanitation, and housing. But beneath that functional surface lies a far more intriguing truth. City layouts have always been social weapons, carefully sharpened by those in charge. Think about the last time you got lost in an unfamiliar part of a city. That slight disorientation, the uncertainty about which way to turn, it's a feeling ancient planners knew how to manufacture. They designed streets not just for carts and pedestrians, but for control. Wide, straight avenues allowed armies to march swiftly and ceremonies to unfold with maximum spectacle. Narrow, winding lanes could confuse invaders or make it easier for authorities to corner dissidents. And it wasn't just the streets. Walls didn't only keep threats out, they also penned people in, creating clear divisions between the privileged and the powerless. Monumental structures, temples, palaces, pyramids loomed over everyday life, serving as constant reminders of who held authority. This was urban planning as theater, as psychology, as a form of soft coercion that shaped civilizations in ways we're still living with today. In this video, we're going to pull back the curtain on these ancient strategies. We'll explore how something as seemingly neutral as a city's layout could reinforce social hierarchies, manipulate movement, and even influence thought. You'll see how gates regulated not just entry but identity, how water systems were wielded as tools of reward and punishment, how sacred spaces doubled as instruments of control. This isn't just a story about bricks and roads, it's about the hidden language of power, written into the very ground beneath our feet. And as we journey from Mesopotamia to medieval Europe, from the Indus Valley to imperial China, you might start to see the familiar streets of your own city in a startling new light. This is about more than history, it's about understanding the silent forces that have shaped human society for millennia, and that continue to influence our lives in ways we seldom pause to recognize. It's easy to look at the ruins of ancient cities and see only crumbling stones and forgotten streets, but if you look closer, you start to see the blueprint of power itself. The very first cities weren't just places where people gathered for safety or trade. They were deliberate, calculated exercises in social engineering. From their very inception, the rulers and priests who orchestrated these settlements understood something profound. If you control the space, you control the people within it. This was never a neutral act of simple organization. It was the conscious creation of an environment designed to channel human behavior in ways that served the interests of a powerful few. Consider the sprawling cities of Mesopotamia, often called the cradle of civilization. At the heart of these early urban centers, like or Uruk, stood the Ziggurat, a massive, tiered temple complex that literally and figuratively towered over everything else. This wasn't just a place of worship. Its central, elevated position sent an unmistakable message. The elites, the priests and rulers who communicated with the gods, were above everyone else. They were closer to the divine, and therefore their authority was not to be questioned. The common people lived in warrens of smaller, simpler homes that clustered around this central power, their daily lives physically oriented toward the source of both spiritual and temporal command. The city's layout made the social hierarchy undeniable, a constant visual reminder baked into the very landscape. Meanwhile, over 1,000 miles away, another civilization was perfecting a different but equally powerful model of control. The cities of the Indus Valley, like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, are famous for their astonishingly modern-looking grid systems. Streets ran in precise north-south and east-west directions, creating orderly city blocks. This wasn't just about neatness or efficient drainage, though those were benefits. This geometric precision was a tool for unparalleled oversight. With long, straight, unobstructed streets, those in power could see farther and move their forces more quickly. It standardized the urban experience, making anything or anyone that fell outside the norm instantly more visible and therefore more controllable. This uniformity allowed for the efficient collection of taxes, the conscription of labor, and the monitoring of the population's movements. It created a sense of order that was, in reality, a form of quiet, pervasive surveillance. What both of these ancient examples reveal is that urban planning was the original architecture of power. It was a way to maintain social order and dominance without the need for constant, visible displays of military force. Why station a soldier on every corner when you can design a city that naturally discourages rebellion and reinforces the status quo? The walls, the temples, the streets, they all worked in concert to create a self-policing environment. Citizens internalized these spatial rules, understanding their place in the hierarchy simply by walking from their home to the market. This was control woven into the fabric of daily life, a silent and incredibly effective social weapon that has continued to evolve for thousands of years, setting the stage for every imperial capital, every medieval fortress town, and even the modern metropolises we live in today. So let's take a closer look at the most visible and imposing of these ancient control mechanisms, the city wall. It's the most straightforward example, the one we can all picture. But its purpose ran so much deeper than just keeping an enemy army out. A wall is a statement. It defines a hard line between us and them, between order and chaos, between the protected and the exposed. For those living safely inside, those towering ramparts of stone or earth were a daily promise of security, a physical manifestation of the ruler's power to protect. But that same power to protect also meant the power to exclude, to trap, and to surveil. The wall was the ultimate symbol of controlled access, and control, as we know, is the essence of power. Consider the legendary walls of ancient Chinese capitals like Xi'an. These weren't simple barriers, they were monumental feats of engineering, often dozens of feet thick and towering high enough to make any invader think twice. But their grandeur wasn't just for defense. The scale and imposing presence of these walls screamed imperial authority. They communicated that the emperor within was so powerful, so significant, that he required a fortress of this magnitude. The message was clear to everyone, both inside and out. For the commoners living in the shadow of these walls or outside them entirely, their place in the social order was made brutally clear by their proximity to this stone embodiment of power. The historian Lewis Mumford perfectly captured this dual nature when he observed that walls defined the limits of power and the reach of law. The law and the protection it offered literally stopped at the gate. This psychological division was every bit as important as the physical defense. A wall creates a defined in-group. Those inside share a common identity, a common safety, and a common obligation to the authority that provides it. This fosters a powerful social cohesion, but it's a cohesion based on a shared dependency. It naturally breeds suspicion of outsiders and reinforces loyalty to the system that maintains the protective boundary. Furthermore, by controlling the gates, the only points of entry and exit, the city's rulers held the ultimate leverage. They could open them for trade, close them at curfew, seal them during a revolt, or charge a toll for passage. This gave them command over everything from the economy to the movement of people, allowing them to monitor who came in, who went out, and what they were carrying. A wall didn't just defend a city, it created a managed environment, a stage upon which the drama of controlled urban life could unfold. Now let's shift our gaze from those towering walls down to the very ground beneath our feet, to the streets themselves. If walls were the bold, unmistakable barriers of power, then streets were its subtle, intricate nervous system. They weren't merely passive pathways for getting around. They were dynamic instruments for directing the flow of life, information, and authority. The width of a street, the angle of a turn, the straightness of its path, every single detail was a deliberate choice with profound social consequences. This was urban planning at its most psychologically astute, where the very route you walked to the market could be designed to shape your behavior and reinforce the existing power structure. Consider the awe-inspiring grandeur of ancient Rome's famous thoroughfares, like the Via Appia or the broad avenues radiating from the Forum. These were not just roads, they were statements of absolute control. Their arrow-straight design served two masterful purposes. First, it allowed the Roman legions to move with breathtaking speed from one trouble spot to another, a constant reminder that the emperor's military reach was long and immediate. Second, these wide streets became the perfect stage for imperial propaganda. Imagine the spectacle of a triumphant general parading through the city, his soldiers marching in perfect unison, followed by carts overflowing with plunder and captured enemies in chains. These processions were theatrical displays of power designed to dazzle the populace, fostering a sense of patriotic awe and reinforcing the message that resistance was not just futile but foolish. The street's design made everyone both an audience member and a participant in the performance of imperial dominance, but the strategy of street design was not one size fits all. In stark contrast to Rome's open declarations of power, the medieval towns of Europe employed a more cunning and convoluted approach. Their streets were a tangled web of narrow, winding alleys that seemed to twist and turn with no logical pattern. On the surface, this appeared to be chaotic, organic growth, but it was often a brilliant defensive adaptation. An invading force would find itself disoriented, funneled into dead-end streets where they could be ambushed from above. However, this design had a dual, more insidious purpose for the people who lived there every day. For local guild masters and ruling councils, these labyrinthine passages were a perfect surveillance tool. A dissident or a criminal could be easily tracked, cornered, and apprehended in the confusing maze. The very layout that protected the town from outside threats also made it a trap for anyone inside who stepped out of line, creating a pervasive sense of being watched that encouraged conformity and compliance. This idea that streets are the living, breathing heart of a city's social life was powerfully captured by the great urban thinker Jane Jacobs. She called streets and sidewalks the main public places of a city. Its most vital organs, ancient planners intuitively understood this truth centuries before it was ever written down. They knew that by designing the pathways, they were designing the interactions that happened upon them. A wide, open plaza encouraged gathering and commerce, but it also made crowds easily visible to authorities. A narrow, bottlenecked street naturally regulated the flow of people, preventing large, potentially unruly assemblies from forming. The pavement beneath your feet was never neutral ground. It was a script that guided your movements, limited your options, and constantly reminded you of the invisible hand of those who held the pen. To truly grasp the power of this ancient design, let's take a virtual walk through Mohenjo-Daro. You're not wandering through a haphazard maze of alleys, you're moving through a carefully orchestrated environment. The streets are laid out in a near-perfect grid, with main thoroughfares running north-south and smaller lanes branching off east-west. This creates a series of identical, rectangular city blocks. The effect is one of overwhelming order. There are no surprises, no secret shortcuts. Every route is predictable, and that predictability is the first key to control. If you're a guard or an official, you can stand at one end of a long, straight street and see exactly what's happening hundreds of meters away. There are no blind corners for illicit activities to hide, no chaotic plazas where a rebellious crowd could suddenly gather unnoticed. The grid doesn't just organize space, it eliminates the possibility of chaos. This obsession with order extended to the smallest details of construction. Archaeologists have been struck by the incredible standardization found throughout the city. The bricks used to build homes, walls, and public structures weren't just roughly similar. They were manufactured to a universal ratio, with dimensions that were consistent across the entire city. This wasn't a coincidence of local custom. This points to a powerful, centralized authority that could impose and enforce strict building codes. Think about what that requires: a ruling class with the organizational power to control production, to manage large-scale labor forces, and to ensure that every single builder in every single neighborhood adhered to the same exact specifications. This uniformity made the city easier to maintain and expand, but it also sent a silent, powerful message to every resident. Your individual choices are secondary to the system's demands. Even your home was built according to the state's master plan. Perhaps the most famous and advanced feature of Mohenjo-Daro was its elaborate, covered drainage system. Each house had its own bathroom and waste disposal, with drains that connected to a network of brick-lined sewers running beneath the streets. This was a marvel of ancient engineering, a system that promoted public health by efficiently managing waste and preventing the spread of disease. But like everything else in this planned city, this public good also served a purpose of social control. Maintaining such a complex, city-wide infrastructure required constant, organized labor. It created a dependency. The citizens relied on the central authority to keep the sewers clear and functional. This gave the rulers a powerful form of soft leverage. The ability to provide clean water and remove waste is a fundamental power over life itself. By being the guarantor of public health, the ruling class cemented its legitimacy and its indispensability, making the population more compliant and easier to manage. The grid layout also provided the perfect framework for economic and social management. With the city neatly divided into uniform blocks, it became incredibly easy for tax collectors to systematically account for every household and every commercial activity. There were no forgotten alleyways or unregistered dwellings. Labor for massive public projects, whether maintaining those sewers, building new structures, or producing those standardized bricks, could be efficiently coordinated and conscripted from this organized population. Furthermore, while the city appears uniform on the surface, archaeologists have identified subtle variations. Certain areas, often elevated on massive mud brick platforms, feature larger homes with more elaborate courtyards and private wells. These are believed to have been the neighborhoods of a privileged elite priests, administrators, or wealthy merchants. The grid, therefore, didn't create equality. It made segregation more efficient. It physically separated the powerful from the ordinary, reinforcing the social hierarchy by literally giving the elite a higher ground, all within the clean, orderly lines of the master plan. This ancient city demonstrates that the grid is far more than a convenient layout. It is one of history's most enduring and effective blueprints for power. Now, let's look up from the streets and the walls to the structures that truly dominated the ancient skyline. If the grid and the ramparts were the tools of practical, everyday control, then monumental architecture was the grand, unforgettable statement. This was power made permanent in stone, a psychological strategy designed to overwhelm the senses and cement the social order not through force, but through sheer, breathtaking awe. The rulers of antiquity understood something profound about human psychology. It is very difficult to rebel against a god, and even harder to question an authority that seems as eternal and unmovable as a mountain. So they built their own mountains. Consider the experience of an ancient Egyptian laborer living in the shadow of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Every single day, from sunrise to sunset, this colossal structure would have been the defining feature of your world. Its polished limestone casing stones would have gleamed blindingly white under the desert sun, a man-made peak that dwarfed everything else in existence. It wasn't just big, it was impossibly, supernaturally vast. For the pharaoh, this was the ultimate insurance policy for immortality, a machine to launch him to the gods. But for the thousands of people who built it and lived around it, the pyramid was a constant, crushing reminder of their own place in the universe. They were temporary, mortal, and small. The pharaoh and the state he embodied was eternal, divine, and immense. The message was inescapable. Your life and your labor are a tiny, insignificant part of a power structure that will outlast you by millennia. This was social control on a cosmic scale. A similar story unfolds in ancient Greece, though with a different architectural vocabulary. The Acropolis in Athens wasn't a tomb. It was a sanctuary, a fortress, and the ultimate symbol of civic pride and power. Perched high on a rocky outcrop overlooking the entire city, its iconic temples, like the Parthenon, were literally and figuratively above it all. To reach it required a long, arduous climb, a physical act of ascent that separated the ordinary citizen from the realm of the gods and the city's elite. The buildings themselves were masterclasses in optical illusion and perfect proportion, designed to appear not just strong but divinely beautiful. This wasn't a brutal display of raw force like the pyramids. It was a more sophisticated assertion of cultural and intellectual superiority. It said that Athens was not only powerful but also the pinnacle of human civilization, its values worth defending and its leaders worthy of reverence. The historian Spiro Kostov perfectly captured the essence of this when he stated that monumentality is the architectural expression of power. It's not just about being big, it's about using scale, placement, and artistry to express an idea of authority that feels inevitable and right. The strategic placement of these structures was absolutely critical to their function. They were never hidden away. They were always positioned to be the unavoidable focal point of the city, ensuring that no matter where you were or what you were doing, the symbol of authority was within your field of view. In the Roman Forum, the temples to deified emperors and the vast basilicas housing courts of law were arranged around open plazas, making government and religion a spectacular public affair. In Persian ceremonial capitals like Persepolis, visitors from conquered nations had to walk through a mile of monumental gateways and past colossal carvings of the empire's immense army before ever reaching the audience hall of the king. This was a carefully choreographed journey designed to instill a sense of vulnerability and submission before a single word was even spoken. This visual dominance worked in perfect concert with the physical control of walls and streets. The streets guided your body, the walls contained it, but the monuments captured your mind, convincing you of the natural and divine right of those in charge. It was the most powerful weapon in the urban planner's arsenal because it aimed not to control your actions, but to conquer your imagination. But if monumental architecture was the grand, unforgettable billboard of power, then religious centers were its beating heart, the place where that authority was made to feel not just impressive, but sacred and unquestionable. This was perhaps the most sophisticated weapon in the ancient urban planner's arsenal, the fusion of faith and geography to create a landscape of control that felt divinely ordained. Imagine living in a world where the gods were as real as the ground beneath your feet, and the ruler was their living representative. Now imagine that your entire city was designed to physically prove that connection every single day. This was the psychological masterstroke of using religion in urban planning. It wasn't about forcing belief, it was about constructing an environment where doubt simply couldn't find a place to take root. Take the sprawling temple complex of Karnak in ancient Egypt. This wasn't a single building you visited on a holy day, it was a vast stone universe you entered. The design was a carefully choreographed journey from the profane world into the sacred. You would start in a wide, open courtyard accessible to more people, but as you moved deeper toward the inner sanctum, the spaces became progressively darker, more cramped, and more restricted. The ceiling lowered, the light dimmed, and the air grew still. Only the high priests and the pharaoh himself could enter the holiest chamber where the statue of the god Ammon resided. This architectural progression wasn't an accident. It was a physical metaphor for the hierarchy of access to the divine. The further in you went, the closer you were to godhood, and the pharaoh was the only one who could go all the way. His daily rituals within that sealed room weren't just ceremonies. They were performances of his unique role as the intermediary sustaining the cosmos. The entire city of Thebes was oriented around this complex, making Karnak the undeniable spiritual and political nucleus. By designing the city this way, the planners made the pharaoh's power seem as natural and necessary as the sun rising over the Nile. To challenge him wasn't just treason, it was blasphemy, a threat to the very order of the universe. This same principle of sacred geography unfolded on the other side of the world, in the massive Mesoamerican city of Teotihuacan. Here, the urban plan is dominated by two colossal structures, the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, connected by a massive central avenue now called the Avenue of the Dead. The layout is meticulously aligned with celestial events like the sun's path on certain equinoxes. This wasn't just astronomical observation, it was a way of anchoring the cities, and by extension, the ruling priesthood's authority to the immutable laws of the cosmos. The pyramids functioned like massive spiritual batteries, drawing pilgrims from across the region. These visitors would walk the Avenue of the Dead, surrounded by the overwhelming scale of the architecture, participating in rituals that reinforced the power of the elites who controlled this sacred knowledge. The city itself became a pilgrimage site, an engine that generated economic income, cultural influence, and most importantly, political legitimacy. The priests atop the pyramids weren't just closer to the heavens, they were the brokers of divine favor, and the city's design made everyone below acutely aware of that fact. This strategic placement transformed these religious centers into far more than spiritual hubs. They became the ultimate tools for social cohesion and behavioral control. Grand festivals and public rituals required the coordination of thousands of people, from farmers and artisans to priests and officials. This collective action, directed from the sacred center, forged a powerful shared identity. You were not just an individual, you were part of the community of Karnak or the people of Teotihuacan. This sense of belonging was incredibly powerful, but it also came with an implicit bargain. Your compliance was the price of inclusion. The hierarchies reinforced through ritual who could speak, who could make offerings, who could approach the altar, mirrored the social hierarchies outside the temple walls. The symbolism was inescapable. The gods had established this order, and the urban landscape was its permanent stone embodiment. This fusion of the sacred and secular allowed rulers to manage not just the bodies of their citizens, but their beliefs, hopes, and fears, crafting a form of control that was deeply internalized and therefore incredibly resilient. But if walls were the grand, defining barriers of a city, then gates were its carefully controlled valves. These were not mere openings in a stone facade. They were the ultimate choke points, the places where abstract power became a tangible, everyday reality for every single person. Imagine approaching a city like ancient Babylon. Before you could even think about entering, you would be funneled toward the Ishtar Gate, and this was no simple doorway. It was a breathtaking spectacle of glazed blue bricks, adorned with row upon row of golden lions, bulls, and the mythical Mushhushu dragon, symbols of the goddess Ishtar and the god Marduk, and by extension, the divine right of the king himself. This was architecture as psychological warfare. The dazzling, intimidating beauty of the gate was a deliberate message. You are now entering the domain of a power so immense it can command such artistry and awe. It was a masterpiece of propaganda designed to overwhelm you with a sense of reverence and submission before you even crossed the threshold. Once you reached that threshold, the practical mechanisms of control swung into action. Guards stationed at the gate and at checkpoints along the walls weren't just there for decoration. They were the human embodiment of the state's regulatory power. Their job was to monitor the constant flow of humanity, scrutinizing everyone who sought entry or exit. They checked cargo, collecting tariffs and taxes on goods that were the lifeblood of the city's economy. They could question travelers, deny entry to suspicious individuals, or detain those wanted by the authorities. This control over movement was a profound tool for social management. It prevented the unauthorized coming and going of spies, fugitives, or agitators. It curbed smuggling, ensuring that valuable resources and tax revenue flowed only through approved channels. In times of plague or unrest, these gates could be slammed shut, sealing the city to create a quarantine or to contain dissent within its walls. The ability to open or close these valves gave rulers command over everything from public health to political stability. This regulation of thresholds extended far beyond security and economics. It dictated the very rhythm of daily life for the city's inhabitants. The opening and closing of the gates at sunrise and sunset marked the official beginning and end of the business day, the time when farmers had to return from their fields, and the moment the night watch began. Your entire schedule was governed by these monumental doors. For the common person, passing through the gate was a daily negotiation with authority, a reminder that your freedom of movement was a privilege granted by the state, not a right. This constant, low-level interaction reinforced social boundaries. The wealthy merchant's caravan might be waved through with a familiar nod, while the poor farmer might be subjected to a more thorough search. The gate was a stage where social status was performed and validated under the watchful eyes of the guards. This physical control over access points was a foundational technology of ancient power, a blunt but effective tool that paved the way for the more subtle and psychological forms of control we will explore next. By mastering the points of entry and exit, urban planners didn't just defend a city. They created a managed environment where every arrival and departure could be observed, taxed, and controlled, making the gatehouse as powerful a social weapon as the palace or the temple. But the true genius of ancient urban planning lies not just in what it did to the body, but in what it did to the mind. Those winding streets and towering walls were more than physical barriers. They were psychological instruments, carefully tuned to influence how people felt, thought, and behaved. Think about the last time you walked through a dense, unfamiliar old town with a maze of narrow, twisting alleys. That slight feeling of unease, the mild confusion about which way to turn, that's not a modern accident. That's a centuries-old design feature. For an ancient inhabitant, that persistent, low-level disorientation cultivated a subtle sense of vulnerability. It made the world feel just unpredictable enough that you might naturally look for guidance, becoming more reliant on local leaders or gatekeepers who knew the way. This dependency was a powerful, quiet form of control, making authority figures seem not like oppressors, but like necessary guides in a confusing world. Conversely, the grand, wide boulevards of imperial cities offered a completely different psychological experience. Striding down a perfectly straight avenue like one in ancient Rome, with clear sightlines stretching for miles, would have created an immense feeling of order and predictability. You knew exactly where you were and where you were going, but that clarity came with its own psychological trade-off, the unsettling sensation of being completely exposed. With no winding paths to duck into, your every move was visible to the guards patrolling the ramparts or the officials looking down from government buildings. This environment didn't just allow for surveillance, it manufactured the constant feeling of potential surveillance. You didn't need to see a soldier to feel his gaze. This encouraged self-policing and conformity, as the very design of the space subconsciously reminded you to stay in line. It was a brilliant, pre-emptive strike against dissent, built not with weapons but with sightlines. Modern cognitive science actually backs up what these ancient planners seemed to understand intuitively. Studies in environmental psychology consistently show that our surroundings have a profound impact on our emotions and behaviors. Cluttered, chaotic, or confusing spaces can increase stress and anxiety, while orderly, predictable environments can promote a sense of calm, but also, at times, a sense of monotony or control. The rigid, repetitive grid patterns the Romans imposed on their conquered territories are a perfect ancient example of this principle in action. For a Roman legionnaire, that grid was a map of efficiency and control. It was familiar, logical, and allowed for rapid deployment. But for a local resident of a place like Londinium or Paris, whose ancestral village might have grown organically around a sacred grove or a meandering river, that same grid could feel alienating and oppressive. Its unyielding uniformity was a constant, stone-carved reminder of a new, foreign power that had reshaped their world into something coldly rational and utterly unfamiliar. The landscape itself became a daily lesson in who was in charge, psychologically conditioning the population to accept a new normal. This demonstrates the ultimate power of urban design, its ability to get inside our heads, shaping our mindset and encouraging compliance without a single word ever being spoken. Now consider something as fundamental as water. It's the source of life itself, and in the arid landscapes where many ancient civilizations took root, control over it was the ultimate power. This wasn't just about engineering, it was a profound form of social weaponry. The rulers who could command water could command people. They transformed a basic human necessity into a powerful currency of influence, rewarding loyalty and punishing dissent with the simple turn of a valve or the directed flow of an aqueduct. This strategy turned hydraulic engineering into a tool of political control, making the state the indispensable provider of life-sustaining resources. The rose-red city of Petra, carved into the cliffs of southern Jordan, is a stunning example of this power in action. In the middle of a desert, water was more valuable than gold. The Nabateans who built Petra were genius hydraulic engineers, constructing an elaborate network of channels, dams, and cisterns that captured every precious drop of seasonal rainwater. But this system wasn't designed for equal distribution. the water was strategically routed. It flowed first and foremost to the monumental tombs and palaces of the elite, ensuring their luxurious gardens and private baths were always supplied. The common populace, living in simpler dwellings further from the center, depended on public fountains and the benevolence of their rulers for their daily water allotment. This wasn't a hidden system, it was a visible, daily reminder of the social contract. Loyalty and compliance were exchanged for access to the life-giving resource that only the powerful could guarantee. The control of water carved the social hierarchy as deeply into the city's functioning as the artisans carved facades into the rock. This same principle operated on a colossal scale in ancient Rome. The famous aqueducts stretching for miles across the countryside are rightfully celebrated as marvels of engineering that enabled the city's massive population to thrive. But they were also masterpieces of political propaganda. The free, public distribution of water at countless fountains, baths, and latrines was a constant, visible demonstration of imperial generosity. It shouted to the masses, "Look what your emperor provides for you." This cultivated a deep sense of dependency and gratitude, reinforcing the idea that the state was the benevolent guardian of public order and health. Yet this generosity had a sharp edge. The same system that fed public baths could be, and was used as a weapon, if a particular neighborhood or community was seen as disloyal or rebellious, authorities could simply shut off their water supply. The ability to grant or deny this most essential resource gave rulers a powerful and immediate form of leverage over their citizens, making the aqueduct not just a conduit for water, but a channel for raw political power. This management of essential resources created a form of control that was far more effective than brute force. A soldier with a sword can enforce a law, but a state that controls the water supply shapes every aspect of daily life. It determines which crops can be grown, which industries can operate, and ultimately, where and how people can live. By positioning themselves as the sole providers and regulators of this critical resource, ancient rulers made themselves seem indispensable. Their power was not just imposed from above, it was woven into the most fundamental routines of existence, from drinking a cup of water to watering a garden. This legacy of using infrastructure as a tool of influence is one that continues to shape our world, echoing in modern debates over water rights and the control of public utilities, proving that the ancient weaponization of necessity is a strategy that has never truly gone away. To understand the full impact of these imperial building projects, we need to step into the shoes of an ancient Roman citizen. Your daily life might involve passing through the original Roman Forum, a bustling, chaotic, and politically charged space that had grown organically over centuries. It was the heart of the Republic, a place where history and competing voices collided. Then you would encounter the imperial fora. Stepping from the old into the new was like walking into a different world. These were not organic developments, they were meticulously curated experiences. Unlike the crowded and irregular Republican Forum, the imperial fora were characterized by their stunning symmetry, vast open plazas, and imposing, uniform architecture. This dramatic contrast was entirely intentional. It created a palpable sense of order, grandeur, and control that the old center simply couldn't match. The message was clear. The new era of imperial rule was more organized, more powerful, and more magnificent than the chaotic past of the Republic. Each emperor's forum was a personalized monument to his power, but they all shared a common architectural language of control. Take the Forum of Augustus, consecrated in 2 BCE. It was designed as a massive, rectangular plaza, enclosed on 3 sides by towering colonnades. This created a defined, almost theatrical space, separating it from the noise of the city and focusing all attention on the main event, the Temple of Mars Ultor, or Mars the Avenger. Augustus built this temple to fulfill a vow made before the decisive battle against Julius Caesar's assassins. So, the entire space was a permanent celebration of his military victory and the peace it brought. The temple's porch was filled with statues of legendary Roman heroes and Augustus's own ancestors, creating a visual lineage that connected him directly to the founders of Rome and the gods themselves. You couldn't enter this space without being overwhelmed by a narrative that said Augustus was not just a ruler, he was the culmination of Roman history and the favored son of the gods. This control extended beyond symbolism into the very movement of people. The design of these forums carefully choreographed the visitor's path. You entered through a limited number of access points, funneled along specific routes that offered predetermined views. There were no shortcuts or places to loiter unnoticed. This guidance wasn't just for crowd control during ceremonies. It was a psychological tool that made you a participant in the emperor's spectacle. Furthermore, the colonnades that lined the squares provided more than just shade. Their shaded porticos, raised above the open plaza, functioned as ideal observation platforms. Officials, and almost certainly imperial agents, could stand in these areas and watch the crowds below without being obtrusive. They could monitor who was meeting with whom, gauge public mood, and identify any potential troublemakers. This subtle surveillance infrastructure meant that even during a busy market day or a public festival, the emperor's unseen eyes were always watching, turning public celebration into an opportunity for oversight. The genius of the imperial fora lay in this multifaceted approach. They weren't just one thing, they were everything at once. They served as new commercial centers, relieving congestion in the old forum while bringing vital economic activity under the direct shadow of imperial monuments. They functioned as open-air museums and libraries, positioning the emperor as the ultimate patron of culture and learning. Most importantly, they were the stage for the empire's most vital rituals, the opening and closing of the doors of the Temple of Janus to signify war and peace, or the ceremony where a young man came of age by assuming the toga virilis, often within this sacred imperial context. Every transaction, every learned discussion, every personal milestone was now framed by the overwhelming presence of the emperor's power. The fora didn't just house the mechanisms of state, they were the state in physical form, a brilliant and enduring fusion of marble, message, and absolute control. While the grand monuments and processional routes were designed to inspire awe, another form of urban control was far more personal, shaping the very neighborhoods where people lived, worked, and interacted. This was the deliberate strategy of social zoning and segregation, a tool used not just to organize a city, but to meticulously divide it. Ancient planners understood that physical separation was one of the most effective ways to reinforce social hierarchies, minimize dissent, and ensure that the elite remained comfortably insulated from the realities of the masses they ruled. This wasn't merely about keeping different groups apart. It was about using the very layout of the city to define identity, limit opportunity, and make social status visible in stone and mortar. Consider the vibrant intellectual heart of ancient Athens, the Agora. We often picture it as the bustling birthplace of democracy, where philosophers debated and citizens gathered. And it was but only for a very specific definition of citizen. This celebrated public space was almost exclusively the domain of free, adult, Athenian-born men. For them, it was a stage for political life and social exchange, but this inclusivity came at a steep price of exclusion. Women, with few exceptions, were largely confined to the private spaces of the home. Enslaved individuals existed in the agora only as the property of others, performing labor without possessing any rights to participate in the society unfolding around them. Foreigners or metics, while sometimes prosperous, were legally barred from citizenship and often resided in distinct districts, forever marked as outsiders. The city's design physically manifested this social order, pushing these marginalized groups to the peripheral areas, away from the central stage of public life. The agora, therefore, wasn't a symbol of universal freedom. It was an architectural embodiment of a rigidly exclusive social pyramid. This practice of managing diversity through division was refined to a high art in medieval Islamic cities. Here, the urban fabric was often a mosaic of semi-autonomous quarters, each housing distinct ethnic, religious, or professional communities. You might have a Jewish quarter, a Coptic Christian district, a neighborhood for Persian merchants, and an area for local artisans, all within the same city walls. For the ruling authority, this model offered a brilliant administrative shortcut. It allowed for a degree of self-governance within each community, reducing the day-to-day burden on central authorities. Each group could maintain its own customs, laws, and places of worship, which helped to minimize flashpoints of conflict between different populations. However, this apparent tolerance was also a powerful mechanism of control. By keeping communities physically separate, the ruling power prevented the formation of a unified populace that could challenge its authority. It was a strategy of divide and rule, where the walls between neighborhoods were as effective as the walls around the city in maintaining a stable, manageable, and hierarchical social order. The tools used to enforce this segregation were both obvious and subtle. Sometimes the divisions were stark and physical, like the literal walls and gates that sealed off the Jewish ghettos of medieval Europe, which were locked at night to imprison their inhabitants. But more often, the barriers were woven into the very urban plan itself. A sudden narrowing of a street, an abrupt dead end, or the deliberate absence of a connecting pathway could effectively cut one neighborhood off from another without a single visible checkpoint. The placement of essential resources like a central fountain, a major market, or a public bath could be strategically chosen to favor one district over another, creating hierarchies of access and convenience. This architectural enforcement meant that segregation wasn't just a social suggestion, it was a geographical reality. Your address determined your access to economic networks, your potential for social mobility, and even your exposure to cultural and political ideas. These invisible barriers, etched into the city map, shaped lives and destinies for generations, creating a legacy of spatial inequality that continues to resonate in the divided urban landscapes of our modern world. So while rulers could shape their cities with walls and monuments, they were also profoundly shaped by the land itself. Geography was never just a passive backdrop. It was an active partner in the exercise of power, offering unique advantages that clever urban planners were quick to seize. Think about the ancient Phoenician city of Carthage, perched on the coast of North Africa. Its location was its greatest weapon. With natural harbors that offered safe anchorage for a massive fleet, Carthage didn't just engage in trade, it commanded it. Controlling the vital sea lanes of the Mediterranean meant controlling the flow of wealth, information, and military power. A Carthaginian ruler looking out from the citadel didn't just see water, they saw a liquid highway of influence, a geographic gift that allowed them to build an empire based on maritime dominance. The city's very identity was tied to the sea, and its planners designed everything from its famous circular harbors to its warehouses to maximize this advantage, turning geography into an engine of imperial ambition. Now travel across the world to the heart of the Andes Mountains and the Inca capital of Cusco. Here, the geographic equation for power was completely different, but just as effective. Instead of open water, the Incas had soaring peaks and steep valleys. They turned this challenging terrain into a formidable tool for control. Cusco was built high in the mountains, a location that provided a natural defensive advantage against invaders. But the benefits went far beyond defense. The surrounding peaks functioned as perfect pre-made watchtowers. Sentries could spot movement in the valleys below from incredible distances, giving the city ample warning of any approach. Furthermore, the difficult landscape allowed the Inca to control movement with breathtaking efficiency. A vast network of roads and rope bridges connected the empire, but these routes were narrow and passed through easily defensible mountain passes. This meant that whoever controlled Cusco and its immediate surroundings literally held the high ground, able to monitor and regulate all travel and communication throughout the empire. The geography didn't just protect the city, it made central authority easier to enforce. This strategic use of high ground is a timeless principle, perfectly illustrated by a city like ancient Jerusalem. Built on a series of hills, its location was a masterclass in leveraging topography for oversight and security. From the high point of the Temple Mount, authorities could survey virtually the entire city and the surrounding countryside. This natural vantage point made it incredibly difficult for any rebellious activity or unauthorized movement to go unnoticed. A potential invader would be forced to attack uphill, facing enormous physical disadvantages, while defenders could rain down projectiles with ease. The psychological impact was equally powerful. For the inhabitants, seeing their temples and palaces silhouetted against the sky, high above their own homes, was a constant, humbling reminder of the elevated status of their rulers, both physically and socially. The city's geography made the social hierarchy feel like a natural, unchangeable fact of life. What all of this reveals is that ancient urban planning was never a one-size-fits-all formula imposed blindly on the landscape. It was a brilliant, dynamic dialogue between human ambition and the natural world. Planners weren't just architects, they were strategic readers of the land, able to identify a good defensive hill, a sheltered bay, or a fertile river bend and envision how to amplify its innate advantages through design. A coastal city would extend its piers and fortify its harbors. A mountain capital would build its roads to exploit natural passes and its temples to crown the highest peaks. This adaptability is what made these cities so resilient and powerful. They weren't fighting their environment, they were partnering with it, using every cliff, river, and shoreline to strengthen their grip on power and shape the lives of those within their walls. Now consider the ceremonial pathways that transformed entire cities into grand stages for the performance of power. These were not simply roads from one point to another, but carefully engineered theaters of control, where the rituals of religion, military might, and royal authority unfolded before a captive audience. In ancient Egypt, the Avenue of the Sphinxes in Thebes stretched for nearly 2 miles, connecting the great temples of Karnak and Luxor with a breathtaking procession of hundreds of statues. This was far more than a convenient thoroughfare. It was a sacred corridor, the setting for the annual Opet festival where the statues of the gods Amun, Mut, and Khonsu were carried in a divine procession from one temple to the other. The pharaoh, acting as the high priest, would lead this spectacular event, physically reenacting his role as the intermediary between the gods and the people. The entire city would line the avenue, not just as spectators but as participants in a ritual that visually cemented the pharaoh's divinity and the cosmic order he represented. The design of the route, flanked by imposing mythological creatures, funneled the gaze of every onlooker toward the central figure of the king, making the city itself an instrument of awe and devotion. This use of urban space for theatrical displays of authority reached its zenith in ancient Rome with the Via Sacra, the sacred way that ran through the heart of the Roman Forum. This was the designated path for the most potent piece of political theater in the ancient world, the Roman triumph. After a major military victory, a conquering general would be granted the honor of parading his legions, his captured loot, and his most important prisoners of war along this very route. The procession was a meticulously choreographed spectacle of raw power. The triumphant general, dressed like the god Jupiter, would ride in a golden chariot, a slave whispering in his ear reminders of his own mortality to keep his pride in check. Behind him marched his soldiers, singing bawdy songs that were traditionally permitted only on this day. The captured treasures, gold, silver, art, and even exotic plants and animals were displayed for the roaring crowds, a tangible measure of the wealth this victory brought to Rome. And most importantly, the defeated enemy leaders, once proud and feared, were now shackled and paraded in humiliation before being led away to imprisonment or execution. The Via Sacra provided the perfect stage for this performance, its path taking the procession past the city's most important basilicas and temples, directly associating military conquest with divine favor and political order. What makes these processional routes such a sophisticated social weapon is their dual nature. They were not imposed upon the populace as a restrictive barrier might be. Instead, they invited participation. People would eagerly crowd these avenues to witness the spectacle, to cheer, and to receive occasional spoils or public feasts. This created a powerful sense of shared experience and collective identity, but it was an identity carefully curated and controlled by the state. By attending, the citizenry became complicit in the celebration of their own subjugation, their applause validating the very power structure that ruled them. The rituals performed along these routes also served to shape public memory. An annual religious festival like the Opet created a cyclical reinforcement of tradition and hierarchy. A one-time event like a triumph wrote a definitive, glorious chapter in the official history of the state, overshadowing the messy realities of war with a clean narrative of victory and divine sanction. The urban planning behind these routes ensured that these messages were delivered in the most impactful way possible, turning the simple act of moving through the city into a powerful tool for building loyalty, reinforcing social order, and forever linking the authority of the ruler with the sacred geography of the urban landscape. It might seem like a vast leap from the stone walls of Zion to the glass skyscrapers of a modern metropolis, but the invisible blueprint of ancient power is still etched into the concrete and asphalt beneath our feet. Those strategies of control, refined over millennia, didn't vanish. They evolved, adapting to new technologies and social structures but still serving the same fundamental purpose, to shape behavior and reinforce authority. We walk through these inherited landscapes every single day, often completely unaware of the ancient logic guiding our steps and influencing our lives. Take the ubiquitous grid pattern found in so many American cities, from New York to San Francisco. While we might credit this to a desire for orderly real estate development, its lineage is far older and more martial. This layout is a direct descendant of the Roman castrum, the standardized military camp that legions would erect at the end of a day's march in conquered territories. The design was ruthlessly efficient, a perfect rectangle with two main roads, the Cardo and Decumanus, crossing at the center where the commander's tent would be. This allowed for rapid troop deployment, easy surveillance of the streets, and the quick subjugation of any local unrest. When these temporary camps hardened into permanent towns, the grid remained. Fast forward to the 19th century, and American planners saw the exact same advantages. The grid facilitated the rapid sale of land, the easy extension of municipal services like water and police patrols, and the efficient movement of goods and people, all forms of control that served the purposes of a growing capitalist state, echoing the logistical needs of an ancient empire. This legacy extends far beyond street patterns. Look at any national capital city like Washington, D.C., with its grand national mall stretching from the Lincoln Memorial to the U.S. Capitol. This vast, open green space, flanked by immense neoclassical monuments and museums, is a modern-day equivalent of an imperial forum. It's designed to inspire awe, to dwarf the individual citizen, and to visually narrate a story of national power, permanence, and destiny. The scale is deliberately inhuman, meant to make you feel small in the face of the state's authority, just as the pharaohs intended with their pyramids. Similarly, the wide boulevards of Paris, carved through the city by Baron Haussmann in the 19th century, are celebrated for their beauty, but their original purpose was chillingly practical. They were built to prevent the barricading of narrow streets by revolutionaries and to allow the army to move cannons quickly to quell uprisings, a direct application of ancient Roman street strategy to modern civil unrest. The 20th century French philosopher Michel Foucault gave us a powerful framework for understanding this continuity with his concept of power dynamics in designed spaces. He argued that modern institutions, prisons, schools, hospitals, and even factories are the direct heirs of these ancient principles. He called architecture a political technology, a tool for managing populations. A panopticon prison, where a single guard in a central tower can see into every cell without the inmates knowing if they are being watched, is the ultimate evolution of the psychological control found in wide Roman avenues. It creates a state of permanent visibility that forces individuals to police their own behavior. We see this same principle in the open-plan office, where the removal of walls allows managers to survey their workforce, or in the standardized classrooms where desks face forward toward the authority figure. These are not neutral designs, they are environments engineered for observation, regulation, and the production of docile, manageable bodies, continuing a tradition that began with the grid of Mohenjo-Daro. This historical perspective is crucial because it reveals that the battle for control of the urban environment is not a relic of the past, it is ongoing and evolving. Today, we see it in the rise of gated communities, which are modern-day versions of walled elite districts, using private security and access codes to create islands of privilege. We see it in the development of smart cities, where the promise of efficiency through sensors and data collection also brings the potential for unprecedented surveillance of our daily movements, a digital extension of the ancient gatekeeper's watch. Even something as mundane as traffic calming measures, park benches designed to deter sleeping, or the removal of public restrooms are subtle, modern forms of urban weaponry used to control who uses public space and how. By understanding that our cities have always been battlegrounds where power is negotiated through design, we become more conscious participants in that process, equipped to question not just how our cities are built, but who they are truly built for. But beyond the grand monuments and sacred processions, power was also exercised in the most mundane of places, the bustling, chaotic, and utterly essential marketplace. This was where the abstract force of the economy became tangible, and ancient rulers understood that whoever controlled the market controlled the lifeblood of the city itself. It wasn't enough to just build a place for buying and selling. The marketplace had to be designed as a strategic hub, a carefully engineered environment where commerce could be observed, regulated, and harnessed for the state's benefit. In the ancient world, the marketplace was far more than an open-air mall. It was a sophisticated instrument of economic and social control, a stage where the drama of daily survival played out under the watchful eyes of authority. Consider the legendary Grand Bazaar of Constantinople, a sprawling, covered labyrinth of thousands of shops and stalls that was the commercial heart of the Byzantine Empire for centuries. Its very location was no accident. Nestled in the center of the city, it was a short distance from the great palace of the emperors, placing it firmly within the sphere of imperial influence. This was not a free market in the modern sense. It was a highly regulated enterprise. Imperial officials, overseers, and tax collectors had a constant presence, monitoring the quality of goods, setting fair price ceilings to prevent inflation and riots, and ensuring that the state received its cut of every transaction through a complex system of tariffs and duties. The flow of luxury goods like silk, spices, and jewels, items that fueled the empire's wealth, was particularly tightly controlled. By dominating this central node of commerce, the emperor didn't just profit from trade. He became its ultimate guarantor and master, weaving the economic well-being of every merchant and customer directly into the fabric of the state's power. This control extended far beyond mere taxation. The physical design of ancient marketplaces was itself a tool for management. Unlike the open, sprawling agoras of earlier Greek cities, many later markets were designed with deliberate limitations. They often featured a limited number of entry and exit points, making it easy for guards to monitor the flow of people and goods. This design prevented smuggling and made it simple to seal off the area in times of civil unrest. Within the market, the stalls of the most valuable or sensitive goods like precious metals, weapons, or official state-controlled commodities were frequently positioned closest to the offices of the market overseers or the barracks of the local guard. This created a visible hierarchy of commerce where the most lucrative activities occurred under the direct shadow of authority. The design ensured that the state's interests were always physically present, a silent partner in every bargain struck and every coin exchanged. Yet, for all this control, the marketplace remained a uniquely dynamic space where authority was not just imposed but also negotiated. It was the city's primary information exchange, a buzzing hive of gossip, rumor, and news from across the empire and beyond. While officials were there to monitor for signs of dissent or potential unrest, they couldn't control every whispered conversation. The marketplace was where the populace could, in subtle ways, push back against authority by complaining about high taxes, gossiping about a corrupt official, or hiding the true value of their goods from the tax collector. This constant low-level negotiation meant that the marketplace was never a simple tool of top-down control. It was a living, breathing organism where the economic power of the state met the cunning and resilience of the individual merchant. The ruler who taxed too heavily or regulated too harshly risked stifling the very commerce that funded his reign, or worse, sparking the very unrest he sought to prevent. Thus, the designed space of the market became a delicate balancing act, a testament to how ancient urban planners understood that true power often lies not in pure domination, but in the careful and calculated management of the vibrant, unpredictable energy of everyday life. To truly grasp the ultimate expression of urban planning as a social weapon, we must journey to the heart of imperial China and step into the overwhelming presence of the Forbidden City. This isn't just a palace, it's a meticulously crafted hierarchy of space, a machine built not for production, but for the absolute assertion of power. Conceived in the early 15th century by the Yongle Emperor of the Ming Dynasty, its very name, Forbidden City, tells you everything you need to know. This was a place forbidden to the common world, a celestial empire on earth designed to separate the Son of Heaven from his mortal subjects through a breathtakingly complex language of walls, gates, and symbolism. Its entire layout is a masterclass in using architecture to create and enforce a social order, making the abstract concept of imperial divinity into something you could literally walk through and feel in your bones. The primary mechanism of control here is progressive restriction. The complex is a series of concentric barriers, each one filtering out a wider segment of society and bringing you closer to the epicenter of power. You begin in the enormous public outer courtyard, a vast plaza that could accommodate thousands for ceremonies, but still kept them at a formidable distance. To move further in, you must pass through a succession of massive gates: the Meridian Gate, the Gate of Supreme Harmony, each one more imposing than the last. With every step inward, the architecture becomes more refined, the decorations more lavish, and the atmosphere more hushed and reverential. The message is direct and physical. Your access is a direct reflection of your status. A low-ranking official might never get beyond the first courtyard. A higher minister might advance to an outer hall. Only the most trusted eunuchs, family members, and officials of the very highest rank could ever hope to catch a distant glimpse of the emperor himself, seated in the innermost throne room. This spatial segregation made the social pyramid tangible. You didn't just know your place in the hierarchy, you experienced it with your entire body as you were either ushered forward or halted at a gate. Every single architectural element was a deliberate tool for psychological conditioning. The design is perfectly symmetrical along a north-south axis, a visual representation of the cosmic order and balance that the emperor was responsible for maintaining. The scale is deliberately overwhelming. The Hall of Supreme Harmony, the largest building, rests on a three-tiered marble terrace that forces you to look up, making the structure, and by extension the authority within, seem superhuman. The color symbolism is inescapable. The dominant color is a vibrant vermilion red on the walls and pillars, a hue associated with good fortune and joy in Chinese culture, but also one that required a rare and expensive pigment, flaunting the empire's immense wealth. Most strikingly, the roofs are glazed with brilliant yellow tiles. Yellow was the color reserved exclusively for the emperor, a visual decree that literally shone down from above, reminding everyone in the city that they were standing in a space owned and defined by one man. This environment was engineered to produce two powerful, simultaneous psychological reactions: awe and intimidation. For a visiting dignitary or a high official, the sheer beauty, precision, and scale of the Forbidden City was meant to inspire wonder and reverence, reinforcing the idea that they were serving a power of celestial magnitude. The perfect harmony and order of the complex suggested that the emperor's rule was equally perfect and natural, yet this grandeur was also deeply intimidating. The endless succession of walls and gates created a sense of being constantly monitored and controlled. The sheer isolation of the inner courts, the emperor's private world, reinforced his mystique and divinity. He was not a man you could approach. He was a distant, god-like figure to be feared and obeyed. Historians note that this isolation was as much for psychological effect as for physical security. It protected the emperor not just from assassins, but from the mundane reality of the outside world, allowing the myth of his divine perfection to remain unchallenged. The Forbidden City stands today as one of history's most complete and uncompromising statements of power through design. It is a testament to the idea that space itself can be weaponized to dictate behavior, shape perception, and legitimize authority. It wasn't built for comfort or efficiency. It was built for control. Every brick, every color choice, every sightline was a calculated part of a system that told every person who entered exactly who they were in relation to the absolute power at its center. It remains the ultimate case study in how urban planning can become a silent, imposing, and utterly effective social weapon. But the assertion of power in the ancient city wasn't just a visual spectacle. It was a full sensory experience, and one of the most subtle yet profound tools in the planner's arsenal was the manipulation of sound itself. While we marvel at the visual grandeur of these places, we often forget to listen to their echoes, which were carefully engineered to carry the voice of authority further and with greater impact than any commoner's shout. This was acoustic design as a form of social weaponry, a way to ensure that the messages of the powerful weren't just seen, but were literally heard above the din of daily life, resonating with a clarity that felt almost supernatural to the ancient ear. Perhaps the most famous example of this auditory control is the breathtaking theater at Epidaurus in Greece. Its near-perfect acoustics are the stuff of legend, allowing a speaker on the stage to be heard with crystal clarity by every single one of the 14,000 spectators, even those in the very top row. We often think of this as a marvel of engineering for the sake of art and drama, and it was. But in the intensely political world of ancient Greece, the stage was never just for plays. This was a space where orators would address the citizenry, where important civic announcements were made, and where the ideas that shaped society were debated and disseminated. The acoustic perfection of the space meant that a skilled speaker could project his voice and his political message with unparalleled force and intimacy across a massive crowd. There was no need for interpretation or repetition. His words landed directly in the ears of every listener, a powerful and unifying experience that could stir emotions and sway opinions with incredible efficiency. In a society where persuasive speech was a direct path to power, the theater's design was a potent amplifier for propaganda, turning human eloquence into an instrument of mass influence. This principle of using architecture to magnify authority extended beyond the open-air theater to the heart of Roman law and commerce, the basilica. These large, rectangular halls, with their high, vaulted ceilings and often semicircular apses at one end, were acoustically engineered to serve the needs of power. When a magistrate or a judge stood to speak from the raised dais in the apse, the curvature of the space and the hard, reflective surfaces of the marble and stone would naturally project his voice forward, focusing attention and lending his declarations an imposing, resonant quality. The acoustics created a clear auditory hierarchy within the hall. The voice of the official boomed with authority, while the murmurs of the crowd gathered in the central nave would be absorbed and diffused, their sound lost in the vastness of the space. This wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate design feature that made the speaker sound more important, more official, and more in command. In the bustling atmosphere of the basilica, where legal disputes were settled and business was conducted, this acoustic advantage ensured that the final word, both literally and figuratively, always belonged to the representative of the state. This auditory dimension of urban control meant that the voice of the ruler could quite literally fill the city, dominating the public soundscape in a way that is difficult for us to appreciate in our modern, noise-saturated world. In an era before mechanical amplification, the ability to project sound clearly across a large space was a rare and powerful asset. During a religious ceremony in a stone temple, a political speech in a forum designed to capture sound, or a judicial proceeding in a basilica, the amplified voice of the authority figure would have been an arresting force. It cut through the background noise of urban life, commanding immediate attention and respect. This control over the auditory environment was a multisensory approach to power, reinforcing the visual messages of monuments and processions with a powerful sonic layer. It reminded the populace that authority could not only be seen towering over them, but could also be heard speaking to them, its voice reaching them with a clarity and power that their own could never hope to match. This subtle tool underscores a profound truth about ancient urban planning. Control was exerted through every possible facet of the human experience, shaping not just what people saw and where they could go, but what they heard and how they listened, ensuring the message of power was an inescapable presence, echoing off every stone wall and colonnade. When an empire conquers a new territory, the battle isn't over when the last sword is sheathed. The real struggle for control often begins not with soldiers, but with surveyors and architects. This is where urban planning transforms into a powerful tool of cultural assimilation, a silent war waged with bricks and blueprints rather than blades. The goal is profound, to reshape not just the landscape, but the very identity of the conquered people, overwriting their history and traditions with a new imperial narrative. It's a form of psychological engineering where the city itself becomes a classroom for a forced curriculum in loyalty, designed to make foreign rule feel familiar, inevitable, and even beneficial. The Romans were the undisputed masters of this strategy, perfecting a process historians call Romanization. After a region was subdued, Roman engineers would arrive not to destroy, but to build. They imposed a template so consistent it became a brand of empire. At the heart of every new city, from Britain to North Africa, was the rigid grid of streets, the Cardo and Decumanus intersecting at the Forum. This wasn't just efficient, it was a powerful symbol of Roman order imposed on what they saw as chaotic native landscapes. The Forum itself was more than a market, it was a stage for the performance of Roman daily life. Here, locals would see Roman law administered in the basilica, conduct business using Roman currency, and gather near temples dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, even if those deities were simply overlaid onto local gods. The public baths weren't merely for cleanliness, they were social hubs where the elite would adopt Roman customs, dress, and language. By offering the tangible benefits of their civilization, clean water, security, commerce, the Romans made assimilation appear attractive. Adopting Roman ways meant access to this new, superior world of comfort and status. The grid was a physical and mental cage, but one that many entered willingly for the privileges it promised. Centuries later and an ocean away, Spanish conquistadors employed a chillingly similar playbook in the Americas, though with a far more overtly religious fervor. Their primary urban weapon was the Laws of the Indies, a royal ordinance that provided detailed instructions on how to lay out new towns in the conquered New World. The blueprint was always the same, a central plaza or plaza mayor forming the unshakable heart of the community. On one side stood the church, its towering presence a constant reminder of the spiritual authority of the Catholic faith. Facing it was the government palace representing the crown's temporal power. This arrangement was no accident. It physically forced the indigenous population to live their lives in the shadow of these twin pillars of control. The grid of streets radiating from this center ensured that the church bells would be audible to every resident, calling them to Mass and structuring their day around Christian rituals. The Spanish strategy was even more brutally effective than the Roman one. They often built their churches directly on top of the rubble of demolished native temples, using the very stones of sacred Aztec or Inca sites to construct their cathedrals. This was the ultimate architectural declaration of conquest. Your gods are dead, buried beneath the foot of the one true faith. The central plaza, which might have once been a site for indigenous ceremonies, was now a space for Catholic processions and auto-da-fés. A complete and violent reprogramming of cultural memory through urban design. What both these historical examples reveal is the deeply ideological nature of city planning. A street grid is never just a street grid, it is a statement of values. It speaks of order over organic growth, of centralized control over local custom, of homogeneity over diversity. This deliberate redesign served to systematically erase local identities. The winding, culturally significant pathways of a Celtic hill fort or the sacred alignments of a Mesoamerican city were bulldozed literally and metaphorically by the relentless, right-angled logic of the grid. The new urban landscape became a constant, inescapable teacher. To navigate the city, you had to accept its new logic. To participate in its economy, you had to engage with its new institutions. To live in its space, you were gradually, inexorably molded into a new kind of citizen, one whose identity was intertwined with the empire that built your world. This cultural weaponization of space demonstrates that there is no such thing as neutral urban design. Every planned environment, from the grandest forum to the humblest grid, carries within it a set of assumptions about power, community, and order, forever shaping the lives and minds of those who walk its path. Beyond the walls that divided space and the streets that channeled movement, ancient rulers sought to master something even more fundamental: time itself. The rhythm of the seasons, the cycle of planting and harvest, the sacred dates of the calendar, these were the pulses of ancient life, and urban planners found ingenious ways to weaponize them. By embedding timekeeping directly into the very stone of the city, they transformed the passage of days and months from a natural phenomenon into a state-sponsored spectacle, aligning the cosmos with the needs of authority and making their own power appear as inevitable as the rising sun. This was a strategy of breathtaking subtlety, one that turned the entire city into a colossal clock and astronomical observatory. In societies utterly dependent on agriculture, survival hinged on knowing precisely when to plant and when to reap. This knowledge was power, and for millennia, it was a power held by a priestly class who could read the heavens. Urban design became the medium through which this esoteric knowledge was displayed and controlled. Structures were meticulously aligned so that on specific days of the year, the solstices, the equinoxes, or other culturally significant dates, the sun, moon, or stars would interact with the architecture in a dramatic public way. This wasn't hidden knowledge for the elite alone. It was a public performance that everyone could witness, a demonstration that the rulers alone could communicate with the forces that governed their very survival. Nowhere is this more brilliantly illustrated than at Chichen Itza, the magnificent Mayan city on the Yucatan Peninsula. Here, the pyramid known as El Castillo is a masterwork of architectural precision and psychological control. This structure is far more than a temple. It is a functioning calendar rendered in stone. Each of its 4 sides has 91 steps, which, combined with the shared step at the top, totals 365, one for each day of the solar year. But the true magic happens during the spring and autumn equinoxes. As the sun sets on these 2 days, the interplay of light and shadow on the pyramid's northern staircase creates the stunning illusion of a serpent slithering down from the heavens to earth. This was no accident. It was a carefully calculated effect that represented the descent of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent deity. The entire community would gather to witness this event, which signaled the time to prepare the fields for the coming rains or to harvest the crops. The ruling priests, by orchestrating this celestial spectacle, positioned themselves as the indispensable intermediaries between the people and the gods of the agricultural cycle. Their authority was renewed with every setting sun, not through force but through a seemingly divine confirmation of their role. This control over the temporal rhythm of life allowed rulers to coordinate society with incredible efficiency. Knowing the exact solar date meant they could synchronize the labor of thousands for massive public works projects, digging irrigation canals, building new monuments, or preparing for seasonal festivals without confusion or delay. It provided a shared schedule that bound the community together in a collective endeavor, reinforcing social cohesion under centralized leadership. More importantly, it naturalized authority. When a king or priest declares it is time to plant because the stars say so, that is an order that can be questioned. But when the city itself, through the immutable laws of geometry and astronomy, announces the time to plant with a shadow slithering down a pyramid, that order feels like a fact of nature. It removes human fallibility from the equation and replaces it with the certainty of the cosmos, making dissent seem not just disloyal but irrational, a defiance of the natural order itself. This fusion of sacred time and urban space represents one of the most sophisticated and enduring applications of power, turning the ancient city into a mechanism for regulating not just where people could go, but when they should act, ensuring that every season, every harvest, and every celebration served to reinforce the hierarchy that made it all possible. For all the awe-inspiring grandeur of forums and temples, the ancient city also had a shadow geography, a deliberately neglected landscape of inequality where the majority often lived out their lives. This was the dark side of urban planning, where design wasn't used to inspire or protect, but to exclude, oppress, and render entire populations invisible. The beautiful, orderly cities we often admire were, in many cases, supported by a hidden foundation of structured suffering, a physical blueprint for keeping people in their place. This intentional segregation wasn't a mere byproduct of growth. It was a coldly calculated tool of social control, ensuring that the elite could benefit from the labor of the masses without having to see them, hear them, or grant them any meaningful rights. We can see this brutal logic clearly in the housing of ancient Rome. While the elite enjoyed sprawling, single-family homes called domus, complete with courtyards and gardens, the vast majority of the city's population, the plebeians, freedmen, and immigrants, were crammed into monstrous apartment blocks known as insulae or islands. These buildings were the ancient equivalent of tenement slums, often rising 6 or 7 stories high on shaky foundations made of cheap concrete and rubble. They were notorious fire traps prone to collapse and lacking any form of running water or proper sanitation. Residents had to haul water up narrow, dark stairways and dump their waste into pots that were emptied into the street below. The Roman satirist Juvenal memorably complained about the constant fear of being killed by a chamber pot emptied from a window above. The ruling class, safe in their low-rise domus on the city's hills, allowed these dangerous, overcrowded fire hazards to proliferate because it concentrated the necessary workforce within walking distance of the city center, while ensuring they remained socially and spatially separated. The poor were kept close for their labor but held at arm's length in every other way. This strategy of deliberate neglect and spatial marginalization continued through the Middle Ages. In many European cities, Jewish communities were forced by law to live in designated areas that became known as ghettos. The term itself originates from Venice in 1516, when the city's Jewish population was confined to a specific islet called the Ghetto Nuovo, which was previously the site of a foundry. This area was isolated from the rest of the city, its gates locked at night, and its residents subjected to strict curfews. This wasn't just social prejudice, it was urban planning as a weapon of persecution. The ghetto's walls served a dual purpose. They kept the Jewish population contained and visibly marked as outsiders, while also allowing Christian authorities to easily monitor and control them. Similar restricted quarters existed for other marginalized groups, from leather tanners who were banished to the outskirts due to the smell of their work, to butchers and other professions considered unclean. These zones of exclusion were designed into the city's fabric, creating a clear and unbreakable cartography of social status. You weren't just poor or marginalized, your address was the physical proof of it, a permanent label you could never escape. The ultimate goal of this dark planning was a form of controlled exploitation. The labor of these marginalized communities was essential to the city's economy. They were the artisans, the porters, the cleaners, the street vendors, but their humanity and their rights were systematically denied. By confining them to specific, overcrowded, and underserved neighborhoods, the elites could benefit from their work while ensuring they remained politically powerless and socially invisible. Keeping these areas out of the main sightlines of the powerful tucked behind main streets, across a river, or downstream from the wealthy districts, meant the ruling class rarely had to confront the human cost of their comfort. This spatial injustice also made it incredibly difficult for dissent to coalesce into effective action. How do you organize a protest when your community is physically isolated, chronically over-policed, and struggling day to day just to secure basic necessities like clean water? The design of the city itself became a tool to preemptively silence opposition, making inequality not just an economic condition, but a built and inescapable reality. Yet, even amidst the stark divisions of crowded tenements and segregated quarters, ancient rulers cultivated another, more subtle landscape of control, one of breathtaking beauty and deceptive tranquility. Gardens and parks were far more than simple decorations or respites from urban life. They were sophisticated instruments of power, carefully designed to reward loyalty, demonstrate unimaginable wealth, and reinforce the very social hierarchies they seemed to transcend. In the hands of a skilled planner, a grove of trees or a bubbling fountain could be as effective a tool of statecraft as any fortress wall or guarded gate, proving that authority could be asserted not only through intimidation, but also through the calculated bestowal of pleasure and peace. The legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon, whether entirely historical or partly mythical, stand as the ultimate symbol of this strategy. Ancient sources describe them as a breathtaking marvel of engineering, a terraced mountain of lush vegetation, exotic flowers, and cascading water, seemingly suspended in the air above the arid Mesopotamian plain. The message this wonder conveyed was multifaceted and brilliant. For foreign dignitaries and visitors, it was a shocking display of the king's boundless resources and technical prowess, a clear warning that a ruler who could bend nature itself to his will was not to be trifled with. For the city's own populace, however, the gardens served as a powerful tool of propaganda. By claiming to have built this paradise to comfort a homesick queen from a greener land, the king performed an act of seemingly personal devotion that was also very public. It presented him not just as a conqueror, but as a man of culture and deep feeling, someone capable of creating beauty for love. This cultivated an image of benevolent authority, fostering popular support by giving the people a shared source of pride and a symbol of their ruler's generous spirit. It was soft power at its most effective, securing loyalty through wonder rather than fear. This concept of the garden as a private domain of the elite was perfected in ancient Persia with the creation of the paradisa, a walled paradise that is the root of our word paradise. These were not public parks but intensely private retreats, sealed behind high walls that shielded the privileged from the eyes of the common world. Within these enclosures, the Persian nobility created meticulously ordered microcosms of the universe as they saw it. Symmetrical waterways represented the four rivers of life. Carefully arranged trees and flowers symbolized order and bounty, and shaded pavilions offered spaces for refined contemplation and private political discussions. The very act of seclusion was a statement of power. While the masses contended with the dust and noise of the city, the elite could retreat into an artificial Eden of their own making, a serene world that physically demonstrated their separation from the everyday struggles of ordinary people. The high walls of the Paradiso were as effective as any palace gate in marking a social boundary, reinforcing a hierarchy where access to tranquility itself was a privilege of status. Beyond their role as symbols, these green spaces were also practical stages for the exercise of power. A ruler might grant a trusted general or a visiting ambassador the rare honor of a stroll through the royal gardens, using the tranquil setting to conduct delicate diplomacy or to broker alliances away from the formal pressures of the throne room. The soothing environment could make guests more receptive, while the ruler's obvious mastery over such a beautiful space reinforced their position of strength. Conversely, these same gardens could be open to the public on certain feast days or following a military victory. Allowing the common people to briefly wander these hallowed grounds and enjoy their cool shade and fresh fruit was a potent form of reward, a tangible taste of the luxury their loyalty supported. This controlled and temporary access created a powerful bond of gratitude and dependence, making the populace feel invested in the ruler's success without actually granting them any real political power. It was a brilliant bargain. The people received a temporary escape, and the ruler secured their goodwill. Ultimately, this ancient weaponization of nature reveals a profound psychological insight. By controlling access to beauty, serenity, and recreational space, planners learned they could directly manipulate the morale and emotional state of a population. A beautiful public garden could serve as a release valve for urban tensions, reducing the likelihood of unrest. A coveted private retreat could be dangled as the ultimate prize for unwavering loyalty. This strategy demonstrates that the urban arsenal was not limited to tools of force and fear. It also included instruments of delight. The ability to provide peace and beauty became yet another form of currency, another method to shape behavior and reinforce the social order, proving that even the most gentle and tranquil environments could be engineered to serve the hard demands of power. Now let's wander into the storybook streets of medieval Bruges, a city that seems to have been lifted straight from a fairy tale with its winding canals, cobbled lanes, and charming stepped gable houses. But beneath this postcard-perfect surface lies a masterclass in controlled urban design, a living example of how beauty and authority could be woven together into the very fabric of a city. Bruges didn't just grow organically. It was carefully shaped by the hands of powerful merchant guilds and civic leaders who understood that a city's layout could be its greatest asset for both defense and dominance. The result was an environment that was as strategically brilliant as it was visually stunning, a labyrinth where commerce and control walked hand in hand. The most immediately striking feature of Bruges is its maze of narrow, meandering streets. Unlike the rigid, predictable grid of a Roman city, these pathways twist and turn with no apparent logic, branching off into tiny alleyways and opening unexpectedly into small courtyards. For any invading force, this layout would have been a tactical nightmare. A heavily armored knight or a column of soldiers would find themselves funneled into tight, confined spaces where their numerical advantage meant nothing, becoming easy targets for defenders who could attack from above or from hidden passages. The streets were a natural defense system, a form of architectural jiu-jitsu that used an attacker's own momentum and confusion against them. But this design had a second, more insidious purpose for the people who called Bruges home every single day. For the local guilds and civic guards, this labyrinth was a perfect panopticon. The irregular sightlines and countless corners made it nearly impossible for anyone to move through the city without being observed by someone. A shopkeeper leaning out a window, a guard patrolling a beat, or a guild member looking down from a second-story meeting hall, all became unwitting agents of surveillance. This constant, low-level observation created a powerful atmosphere of informal social control, where illicit activities or gatherings of dissenters could be quickly spotted and reported, long before they could ever become a real threat to the established order. At the very heart of this controlled maze lay the market or central market square, a vast open space dominated by the soaring, 83-meter-high belfry. This tower was far more than just a beautiful landmark. It was the central nervous system of the city's power structure. From its upper levels, watchmen could see across the entire city and the flat Flanders countryside for miles around, spotting approaching armies, fires, or any sign of trouble long before it arrived. The bells in its carillon did more than just mark the hours. They sounded alarms, called citizens to assembly, and signaled the start and end of the workday, regulating the economic life of the city with the same authority as a royal decree. The belfry's sheer height made it an unmistakable symbol of civic pride, but it was a very specific kind of civic pride, one that was deeply intertwined with the merchant oligarchy that ruled from its shadow. The square itself, surrounded by the ornate guild halls of the powerful cloth and merchant guilds, was the economic engine of Bruges. By concentrating the most valuable commercial activity in this one highly visible and easily monitored plaza, the city's rulers could keep a close eye on trade, collect taxes efficiently, and ensure that the immense wealth generated by the wool and cloth trade flowed through channels they controlled. The layout funneled prosperity right to their doorsteps while keeping it securely within their grasp. This carefully engineered environment created a fascinating social paradox. On one hand, the dense, inward-facing design, with its enclosed courtyards and shared public spaces, fostered an incredibly strong sense of community and local identity. Neighbors knew each other, guilds provided social support, and the city walls created a clear distinction between the us inside and the them outside. This cohesion was a source of great strength and resilience. On the other hand, this same sense of community was carefully bounded and managed to serve the interests of the powerful. The guild system, while offering protection and economic opportunity to its members, was also highly exclusionary, controlling who could practice a trade and preventing upward mobility for those outside its structure. The city's design reinforced this oligarchic control. The grandest homes and guild halls faced the central squares, putting the wealth and power of the elite on constant display, while the narrower, darker, and less desirable streets behind them housed the poorer laborers and artisans who served them. This physical manifestation of the social hierarchy was a constant, subtle reminder of one's place in the order of things. The charming, winding streets of Bruges, which today delight millions of tourists, were in their time a sophisticated and highly effective social weapon, proving that a city did not need to be imposing and militaristic to exert control. It could be beautiful, intimate, and communal, all while ensuring that those in charge remained firmly in charge. But the most profound power over life wasn't just about managing waste, it was about controlling the very water that sustained it. The Romans took this concept to an unparalleled level with their vast network of aqueducts. These soaring stone arches marching across the countryside weren't merely feats of engineering. They were the arteries of imperial control, pumping the lifeblood of the empire directly into the heart of the city. The state's ability to provide a constant, clean water supply was a spectacular display of benevolence, but it came with an invisible leash. Public fountains, baths, and latrines became hubs of social life, but they were also nodes of surveillance. The flow of water could be monitored, measured, and most importantly, manipulated. If a neighborhood showed signs of unrest or disloyalty, the authorities could quietly reduce their water access or increase the price, using the most basic human necessity as a lever for compliance. This wasn't just about punishment, it was a constant demonstration of dependency. Every time a citizen took a drink from a public fountain or enjoyed a bath, they were participating in a silent transaction that reinforced the state's role as the indispensable provider of life itself. The Roman bath complex is a perfect example of this duality. These were magnificent public spaces for relaxation, business, and socializing, offered to the populace for free or at a very low cost. They promoted hygiene and public health on a massive scale, reducing disease and improving quality of life, but they were also environments of intense social scrutiny. The open, communal nature of the baths meant that behavior, social connections, and even physical health were on display, allowing informants and officials to observe the populace in a state of unusual intimacy and vulnerability. The gift of public health was also a tool for unprecedented public oversight. Centuries earlier and thousands of miles away, the Indus Valley civilization had already mastered this intricate dance between public health and social control. The city of Mohenjo-Daro's advanced covered drainage system was a marvel that prevented epidemics and flooding, creating a standard of urban sanitation that wouldn't be matched for millennia. But this system represented more than just civic pride. It was a monumental infrastructure project that required a powerful, centralized authority to plan, build, and crucially, to maintain. The intricate network of brick-lined drains connecting every home to a main sewer couldn't be managed by individual households or even neighborhoods. It demanded a coordinated, city-wide effort directed from the top. This created a powerful, practical dependency. The citizens relied completely on the ruling class to keep this complex system functioning. If a drain clogged or a cesspool overflowed, it wasn't a private problem. It was a public one that required the intervention of the central authority. This gave the rulers a powerful form of soft power. By being the guarantors of public health and sanitation, they cemented their legitimacy and their necessity. Their power was woven into the most mundane acts of daily life, from washing to waste disposal, making their authority seem as natural and essential as the water flowing through the pipes. This early example shows that biopower, the regulation of life by the state, is not a modern invention but a fundamental strategy of urban control that emerged with the very first cities. The French philosopher Michel Foucault gave us the term biopower to describe this modern phenomenon, but its roots are ancient. He argued that starting in the 17th century, sovereign power began to shift from the right to take life or let live, the power of the executioner, to the power to foster life or disallow it. This was the power to manage populations, to regulate health, hygiene, and reproduction. Yet, as we see in Rome and Mohenjo-Daro, this shift was prefigured in the ancient world. The elaborate census systems of empires used for taxation and conscription were early attempts to quantify and manage the population. The Roman cura annii, the state-sponsored grain dole, was a massive program to feed the urban poor, preventing famine and revolt, but also creating a vast population dependent on the emperor's generosity for their daily bread. This intertwining of care and control is the essence of biopower. The state's concern for your health, your food, and your cleanliness is genuine. A healthy population is a productive, stable, and strong population. But that same concern grants the state an unprecedented right to intervene in the most private aspects of life, to set norms for behavior, and to create systems of dependency that are very difficult to break. The gleaming aqueduct and the clean street become, in this light, not just gifts from a benevolent ruler, but the very mechanisms through which that ruler's power is made intimate, personal, and utterly indispensable. It's a sobering reminder that even the most welcome improvements to our quality of life can serve a double purpose: wrapping the iron fist of control in the velvet glove of care. The strategies of control we have explored did not fade away with the fall of ancient empires. Instead, they evolved, adapting to new technologies, new forms of government, and new social structures, proving that the use of urban design as a social weapon is a constant in human history. The Renaissance, often celebrated for its artistic and intellectual rebirth, also gave us a new urban vision of power. In cities like Florence, the medieval maze of streets was gradually reshaped by wealthy merchant families like the Medici. They commissioned grand piazzas and long, straight avenues that cut through the old urban fabric. This wasn't just for beauty, it was a calculated move to showcase their newfound dominance over the feudal aristocracy. The geometric clarity of these new spaces reflected a new, human-centric worldview, but it also served to stage public processions and display the art and architecture that celebrated their patrons. The city itself became a canvas for a new kind of power, not imperial or divine, but mercantile and familial, yet no less effective in shaping society and broadcasting who was truly in charge. This evolution took a dramatic turn in the 17th century with the rise of absolute monarchy, and nowhere is this more starkly visible than in the creation of Versailles. King Louis XIV of France didn't just build a palace, he engineered an entire landscape of subservience. The Baroque design of Versailles is a masterpiece of psychological manipulation on an epic scale. The palace is placed at the absolute center of a vast, radiating web of avenues that stretch out into the countryside, symbolizing the Sun King's power reaching into every corner of his realm. The immense, meticulously ordered gardens with their perfectly trimmed hedges and orchestrated fountains represent the ultimate taming of nature to serve royal will. Most importantly, Louis forced the French nobility to live with him in this gilded cage, by compelling his most powerful rivals to reside in his palace, where their every move was governed by an elaborate and humiliating set of court rituals. He neutralized them as a political threat. The very design of the estate kept them isolated from the people, dependent on his favor, and constantly competing for his attention. Versailles is the apotheosis of urban weaponry as theater, using overwhelming scale, symmetry, and spectacle to render opposition unthinkable. The next great leap in this evolution came with the Industrial Revolution and the rise of the modern metropolis. The crowded, chaotic, and often rebellious cities of the 19th century presented a new challenge to those in power. The answer, once again, was to redesign the streets. In Paris, Emperor Napoleon III and his prefect, Baron Georges Eugen Haussmann, undertook a radical transformation of the city's medieval core. They sliced wide, straight boulevards directly through the dense, working-class neighborhoods that had been the hotbeds of revolutionary activity. These new avenues, now famous for their beauty, were explicitly designed for three purposes of control. First, they allowed for the rapid deployment of troops and cannons to any district in the city, preventing rebels from barricading the narrow, easily blocked alleys of old. Second, they opened up the city to air and light, improving public health but also visibility, making it impossible for clandestine activities to go unnoticed. And third, they physically displaced entire communities, breaking up traditional centers of dissent and dispersing the urban poor to the periphery. This was urban planning not as a subtle influence, but as a surgical instrument of state power, and its model of using broad avenues for both beautification and control was copied by cities around the world, from Buenos Aires to Washington, D.C. Today, the legacy of these ancient strategies is more pervasive than ever, though it often wears a digital disguise. Gated communities are the modern equivalent of walled elite districts, using private security, access codes, and perimeter walls to create islands of privilege and exclusion within the larger city. The rise of the smart city concept takes this a step further, embedding sensors and data collection networks into the very infrastructure of urban life. The promise is one of perfect efficiency, reduced traffic congestion, optimized energy use, and improved public services. But this constant data stream also creates the potential for a level of surveillance that ancient rulers could only have dreamed of, where every movement, every purchase, and every interaction can be tracked, analyzed, and potentially used to manage or manipulate populations. Even commonplace elements like anti-homeless architecture, bench dividers, sloped window ledges, and targeted sprinkler systems are subtle, modern-day versions of the same old weaponry, designed to control who can use public space and in what way. This unbroken thread of history, from Mohenjo-Daro's grid to the algorithms of a smart city, forces a crucial realization: urban planning is never a neutral, technical exercise. It is always and inherently political. The design of our cities is a direct reflection of who holds power in a society and how they choose to wield it. Every decision about where to put a road, a park, or a public housing project is a decision about how to shape human behavior, reinforce social hierarchies, and distribute resources. The historical continuity of these strategies challenges us to become more conscious, critical readers of our own urban environments. It asks us to look at a gated community and see not just security but segregation. To look at a wide boulevard and see not just beauty but a history of counterinsurgency. To look at a smart city proposal and ask not just about efficiency but about data ownership, privacy, and who ultimately benefits from this new form of control. By understanding that our cities have always been battlegrounds of power, we become empowered to ask the most important question of all: who is this city truly designed to serve? From the immense walls of ancient Zion that separated emperors from commoners to the wide, camera-lined boulevards of our modern metropolises, the story of the city has always been the story of power itself. We have journeyed together through the silent language of urban design, uncovering how ancient rulers masterfully wielded walls not just for defense but for division, engineered streets to channel movement and monitor dissent, and raised monumental architecture to dominate the skyline and the human spirit. We saw how even the most fundamental elements of life, water, health, and the very passage of time, were harnessed as tools to reward loyalty, punish defiance, and make authority feel as inevitable as the rising sun. This exploration reveals a profound truth that is so often hidden in plain sight. Our cities are not accidental collections of brick and mortar. They are perhaps humanity's most enduring and sophisticated social weapon, carefully crafted environments that don't just house us, but actively shape our behavior, reinforce social hierarchies, and quietly instruct us on our place within them. This historical journey challenges us to become more conscious readers of our own world. The next time you walk through your own city, try to see it with these ancient eyes. Notice the wide avenues that allow for easy police patrols, the private parks and gated communities that echo the walled gardens of Persian elites, or the way grand government buildings are positioned on high ground, commanding attention and oversight. Consider how the flow of traffic might prioritize certain neighborhoods over others, or how the placement of public transit access can either connect communities or isolate them. These are not neutral design choices. They are the modern legacy of an ancient practice, the ongoing conversation about who controls space and, by extension, controls the people within it. Your daily route to work, the parks you relax in, even the sightlines from your apartment window, they are all part of a designed environment that influences your life in ways both subtle and significant. So we leave you with this final thought and an invitation to continue the exploration. What does the design of your own city whisper about the power structures that built it? Does your downtown have a grid pattern that speaks of efficiency and control? Are there monuments that tell a very specific story about who is celebrated and who is forgotten? We would love to hear what you discover. Share your observations and reflections in the comments below. Let's learn from each other and decode the urban mysteries that surround us every day. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden forces that shape our world, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Together, let's keep pulling back the curtain on history's greatest mysteries, one hidden story at a time. Thank you for watching.